Hello, everyone, and welcome to Carpet City Cinema, a Gila Films podcast. I'm David Weaver, and just start straight off with the newest from the Gila Films headquarters. Overhauled the website the other night. Realized that it's a good thing. We're getting onto a lot of different streaming platforms, and the site was getting rather clunky. We're now up to 8 different platforms that carry us. So went through and revamped the site. Made it a little cleaner, a little more easier to scroll through. And there you can find links to each of those 8 platforms. We are now on Amazon Prime, YouTube, Tubi, iTunes, Plex TV, Darkroom, Woku, and our latest edition is Zumo Play. So check those out. And in case you've forgotten, of course, our website address is gila-film.com. That's gila-film.com. Things continue to go really well for Break Glass, the latest feature film from Gila Films family member Jay Leonard, producer of our horror flick, The Last Frankenstein. We've talked about this movie recently, how it was just playing at the Jersey Shore Film Festival. In fact, it literally just played there last night. And just since our last episode, Break Glass has been accepted into 2 additional film festivals. It will be playing at the New York Liftoff Film Festival and also at the Monadnock International Film Festival. So big shout out to everyone on the Break Glass team, which, as I mentioned, also includes Last Frankenstein cast members Jeff Riano, Keely Sheridan, and Jorge Luna. So stay tuned to the Facebook page as they get more info on when the exact screening dates will be and such. That's Break Glass Movie is the name of the Facebook page for that. So we recently hyped up some upcoming Blu-ray announcements from a newer label called Film Masters. We talked about their upcoming double feature release of The Giant Gila Monster and the Killer Shrews, and that should be followed by a double feature release of Beast from Haunted Cave and Ski Troop Attack. And they put out a statement, actually, to kind of give out more information on their label and its background. And it turns out it is indeed, there had basically been a lot of suspicion that this was, that this label was an offshoot of the Film Detective, the company known as the Film Detective. And sure enough, Film Masters is a boutique label which has been founded by Phil Hopkins, the founder of Film Detective. And they're planning on doing 1 Blu-ray a month, which is incredible because just initially these first 2 releases are killer. And the work that have been done by the Film Detective over the last year or so, so many classic cult films and other types of movies as well. But this is just really exciting. They're going to be keeping up at a pace of 1 Blu-ray a month. They've got this great team of different people who are going to be involved with the releases, including Larry Blamire, who is a filmmaker in his own right. A lot of people are familiar with his Lost Skeleton of Cadaver movies, which pay homage to the old B movies of the 50s. These comedy, science fiction films he's done, but he's also a historian, very knowledgeable about cult cinema. Daniel Griffith of Ballyhoo Motion Pictures is on board. Tom Weaver, no relation to me, but he actually does live in New York State as well. Really well-known historian who's published these great interview books with people who worked both in front of and behind the camera on a lot of cult classics. He's going to be involved. He's done a lot of commentary tracks for Kino Lorber as well. Jason A. Nay, C. Courtney Joyner, again, 2 more really well-known film scholars. Sam Sherman, who I assume it's the same Sam Sherman who was an exploitation producer in his own right, and who was behind many of Val Adamson's movies. So this is definitely something I'm really keen to see how this plays out. They actually teased their next release to be following the Beast from Haunted Cave Ski Troop Attack double feature, and that will be the 1934 version of The Scarlet Letter, starring Colleen Moore. This is the first sound adaptation of Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel, and it never had even a decent DVD release. Never been on Blu-ray and never had a good DVD release. It's always like, dollar store DVDs. It's the only way you could really find that level of quality. But they're doing a 4K restoration on it, from original 35 millimeter archival elements. Not too many details beyond that. They just tease the title. And if you go over to the Filmmaster's website, you can see the cover art as well as pre-order the other two titles. But yeah, definitely really super stoked for this. Of course, cult film fans know that right now there's a big sale going on over at Vinegar Syndrome, a week-long sale that they're having. And Severin Films just had their big sale. Basically, for Severin, it's kind of equivalent to they don't call it that, but it's equivalent to a halfway to Black Friday sale. And Vinegar Syndrome already had something like that recently, but the sale that Vinegar Syndrome's having right now, they're basically doing these great deals on different select group of titles every day, ending Friday. But they also announced some new releases too. They're putting out, and this was kind of not what I would have expected necessarily from them, at least not from their main Vinegar Syndrome line, and that is they're putting out on 4K UHD the classic 1961 monster movie Gorgo, which was kind of like essentially the UK response to Godzilla. That's kind of dumbing it down, but you could sum it up as that, I guess, basically. But I guess I would have, now that they've started this new sub-label, Vinegar Syndrome Labs, I guess I wouldn't have been surprised if it came out via that line because they've been tackling older films with that line. But definitely was surprised that they put it out on just their main line. Now they're also putting out on 4K the 80s slasher Terror at 10 Killer, which is a movie that was made by the same people who started the label VCI, the boutique label VCI, which is still in business. And this is probably how they ended up with Gorgo because they licensed Terror at 10 Killer from VCI, who apparently weren't interested or got a better offer from Vinegar Syndrome to put this out on Blu-ray and 4K. And I'm guessing that because VCI has put out the last Blu-ray and DVD releases of Gorgo, that kind of came in on the deal too. They also, they announced several titles, but another one of those that really stood out that Vinegar Syndrome just announced this past week was the 1972 Italian horror film Delirium, starring Mickey Hargitay, which is looked at a lot as one of the sleazier gialli films of its era. But yeah, I'm definitely down to check that out. I really enjoyed Mickey Hargitay's 60s Italian horror film Bloody Pit of Horror. That's a lot of fun. Severin put that out on Blu-ray. So yeah, looking forward to checking this out as well. But yeah, you got till Friday if you want to add some stuff each day. They're putting up new titles at noon. And like I said, it's like really great deals, like $12-14 a pop. So check that out. Shout Factory and their sub-label Scream Factory also really knocked it out the park with some new announcements this week. They're going to be upgrading their Blu-ray release of My Bloody Valentine and also their Blu-ray release of Night of the Comet, both to 4K, which I guess is terribly surprising with My Bloody Valentine especially. I'm at the point now where if I don't own even any horror film that's even like semi-major in reputation, even like just like a moderately well-known, or it's made by any director with any type of cachet to his name, it's like I don't own it on Blu-ray yet. I'm kind of like at this point, I'm like, might as well just wait to see if they put it out on 4K because everything's getting 4K. I'm sure that they'll put out April Fool's Day on 4K, although I already own that Blu-ray. I mean, you're kind of at the point now where it's like if it's by Carpenter or Fulci or Craven or Tobe Hooper, unless maybe it's one of their TV movies or something. All this stuff's going to eventually come out in 4K. It's great, though. I mean, it's great to see the increase in detail and the use of high dynamic range on a lot of these releases. So I'm definitely all about it. They're also bringing to Blu-ray for the first time the 1977 Killer Dogs movie, The Pack, which I'm a huge fan of that movie. I used to have the old Warner Brothers VHS clamshell tape of that, and then I got the Warner Archive DVD, which they put out. Robert Urich, the star of the movie, a lot of other great character actors in supporting roles. P.B. Besh, Carol Marcus from Star Trek 2's in it. R.G. Armstrong, who was in so many of Sam Peckinpah's films. Paul Wilson from Cheers. It's about basically a bunch of, as the title implies, a bunch of wild dogs packed together on this island, which is mostly a vacation spot for people to go like fishing and whatnot. But at the time that the events are unfolding, it's pretty much most of the people have gone back to the mainland, and it's just the actual year-round residents who are left behind and who have to face this threat and find a way to get off the island or at least get in touch with someone from the mainland. this is one of those movies that used to play late night on TNT. I remember back in the day. Also went by the title The Long Dark Night. But just it's just one of those films. It has such a rewatchable factor to it. Um, Definitely part of that is this cast is such a rugged cast. The dogs look great. They really do look really vicious. It's a pretty tame movie in terms of like, not in terms of violence or menace, but in actual gore. Like it's made during that time where this is pre PG-13, so you could have you basically went from PG rating to R rating. So you might have a PG movie with topless women, and then a R-rated movie that's really not. It would basically be a PG-13 now, and the pack's kind of in that latter group where it's like it would be just a PG-13 if it came out now. But and I don't say that to put the film down in the sense of what it offers as a horror film. It just has a great sense of the location, this kind of like coastal island, kind of like in the fall time. And yeah, and I just again it kind of goes to that classic horror trope of these you're this group of people stranded alone with facing this kind of like menacing larger force. It's the Night of the Living Dead kind of story, except instead of zombies, it's dogs. So really looking forward to checking that out. Kind of curious what they're going to do for extras. There are some of the cast members are still around. I know Paul Wilson, I think, was involved with the extras for the Devonsville Terror, which he was also in. So maybe they'll get him. I think Jordan Baker's not doing extras anymore. He's still alive, but I think he just kind of was like enough with that. So we'll see. And they also announced through just Shout Factory, not Scream Factory, but the main Shout Factory line is there, and this is right in my wheelhouse, is they're putting out an Irwin Allen Master of Disaster box set. So Irwin Allen, a legendary producer, won an Oscar early in his career for the documentary The Sea Around Us. Did some feature films like The Story of Mankind and The Lost World and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, the original feature film, and then became a very successful television producer in the 60s. He did the Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea TV show, Lost in Space, The Time Tunnel, Land of the Giants, and then in the 70s, he made his name as this producer of disaster films. The two best known examples being his first two forays into that genre, The Poseidon Adventure and The Towering Inferno. Well, throughout the rest of the 70s into the early 80s, he produced a series of 5 made-for-television disaster films, as well as 3 more feature films for the big screen. Now, one of these feature films, The Swarm, has already been put out on Blu-ray by Warner Archive. Alan directed and produced that. But the other 7 films, they will be released as part of this box set, and it'll be the Blu-ray debut for all of them. So the 5 TV movies he did were Flood, Fire, Hanging by a Thread, which is about a group of people trapped on this dangling tram coming back from a mountain ride. The Night the Bridge Fell Down, and Cave-In. A lot of familiar faces in these movies: Leslie Nielsen, Ray Milland, Patty Duke, Donna Mills, Ernest Borgnine. They're a lot of fun. The 2 of them, Hanging by a Thread and The Night the Bridge Fell Down, those were 2-part TV movies. The Night the Bridge Fell Down is definitely very padded to get to that 2-part status, but they're all really enjoyable. There's kind of like these two figures who are kind of big in the disaster genre of the 70s. Irwin Allen was one, and then I think Jennings Lang is really the other one. He was the producer behind Earthquake, and not the original Airport, but he produced the 3 sequels. He was over at Universal with those films. And of course, I've waxed philosophical many times about my love for the Universal look of the 1970s. But these Allen films are also equally enjoyable. This is one of my favorite genres of this decade. It's a genre that's completely linked with this decade. The assembly of these huge casts, huge big name cast, and then going through the steps of killing them off in wonderfully slow motion ways, while mixing in elements of soap opera material on the side. It's just gloriously trashy. Now these are the lesser ones in terms of quality, for sure. I mean, I enjoy all the disaster movies of the '70s, but there's no denying that these are the lesser films. And the TV movies obviously are made on a very much apparent smaller budget, and their names are not as big in those, but still fun. And now the two feature films in the set are Beyond the Poseidon Adventure and When Time Ran Out. Now, Beyond the Poseidon Adventure, 1979. Again, Alan, like The Swarm, the year before, he directed and produced this. It would be the last film he would direct. He would continue to produce, but it would be the last one he'd actually direct. And Michael Caine, who had been the star of The Swarm, also did this one as well. Also had Slim Pickens was in both of them as well. Sally Field, Carl Malden, Peter Boyle, Angela Cartwright from Lost in Space, Telly Savalas, Jack Warden, Shirley Jones. That's just some of the other people in this. And this is basically the premise of this is that there were some other survivors who we didn't know about from the original Poseidon Adventure movie, who are now trying to find their way out. But they have to contend with essentially modern day pirates. Telly Savalas is there to strip the Poseidon of its cargo. So that so that my whole thoughts on that and The Swarm were that it's interesting because the Towering Inferno and the Poseidon Adventure are truly good films. The Towering Inferno is one of my all-time favorite films, just hands down. And those came out respectively 1972 and 1974. And Alan on those, he was producer and he was kind of basically a co-director. So he was listed as directing the action sequences, and then that's how he put it in the credits. And then the other scenes, which I guess you'd assume were the dialogue and character-driven scenes, they were directed by other directors. The Poseidon Adventure, it was Ronald Neame, very well-known British filmmaker, and likewise, the Towering Inferno, it was John Gillerman, another well-known British director. But for The Swarm and the Beyond the Poseidon Adventure, Alan took that responsibility completely on himself to direct. And it's interesting that there's this gap of 4 years, because both those films were huge hits. 1972 Poseidon Adventure, 1974 Towering Inferno, and then he waits 4 years before he does The Swarm. Instead of just going into another theatrical release, he puts out a couple of those TV movies in the meantime. I don't know why he did that. If it was just to kind of like maybe milk it for more of what it's worth. Maybe it's kind of like the 1970s equivalent of what Marvel does now, where they throw some streaming shows in between their feature films. But definitely coming back to do The Swarm, it's just nowhere near on the level of those earlier films. Again, I think The Swarm is a lot of fun. I like watching it, but it's not a good film. It lacks the artistic strengths of the earlier films. The acting is poor. The screenplay is, even though a lot of times these were a lot of the same writers. I mean, Sterling Silliphant, Academy Award-winning writer of In the Heat of the Night, creator of Route 66, was the writer on most of these films. The theatrical release ones that Alan made, and the script's really rough. I don't know what exactly happened in that 4 years, but it wasn't great. Not so much for your entertainment factor, but for the quality factor. And Beyond the Poseidon Adventures, in that same kind of problem area. Another thing about Beyond the Poseidon Adventure is, when you go to see a disaster film, you really want the disaster to be something on an epic scale. So, the Towering Inferno is people trapped at the top of this massive skyscraper and fire just climbing up. And Poseidon Adventure, it's that great tagline, hell upside down. You're on this ship and it's turned upside down. So now you're trying to make the way to the bottom of the ship, which is now on top. Airport 75 and 77 and all those, these great airline collisions, or the Airport 77 is where the Jack Lemmon's piloting the plane and it goes underwater. Those are really high stakes, pretty big scale disasters they're facing. Now you get to something like Beyond the Poseidon Adventure, and it's like, well, we already kind of went through this once before. Yeah, the ship's capsized and upside down, and now kind of like even a bigger threat than just trying to get out the ship is Telly Savalas and his goons, and like that's not really something a threat worthy of a disaster movie. I mean, just a bunch of bad guys going around with henchmen and whatnot. That's like, I mean, that's something you could find in any action or suspense film. So it's kind of like a lower stakes disaster that kind of you know that's kind of attached to it. That definitely does not work in its favor. Now, when time ran out, that is the other feature film on this set that came out in 1980. And again, Alan, by this time, no longer directing, he produced it. James Goldstone directed it. Um, and this film is the disaster. This film is a volcano, which that's a solid enough idea for a disaster film. Definitely right up there with earthquakes and all that kind of stuff. And it's a volcano on an island. Um, top top drawer cast again. You got Paul Newman, who basically did this to fulfill a contractual obligation he had left over from the Towering Inferno. William Holden, who's kind of in the same boat. Jacqueline Bisset, Ernest Borgnine again, Red Buttons, Alex Karras, for all you football fans. Edward Albert, Eddie Albert's son, he's on there. And before he was big, Pat Morita, Mr. Miyagi, is in it. This film was a huge bomb when it came out, and again, rightly so. It's just rehashing whole ideas from the earlier movies. For example, in the Towering Inferno. Well, actually, if you go back to the Poseidon Adventure, one of the famous scenes for the Poseidon Adventure is where to get from one section to another of the capsized ship that everyone's trapped on, Gene Hackman, the lead actor in the film, has to swim through some submerged sections of the ship with a rope as kind of like a tow line. And he has to reach a dry section of the ship where he can tie the tow line so that people can then follow this line underwater to get to a part of the ship where there is where they can breathe air again. And he gets trapped as he's traveling underneath the water, and Shelley Winters, in her Academy Award-nominated performance in the supporting cast of this film, who is a former expert swimmer, she has to go underneath the water herself to kind of rescue Gene Hackman when he gets trapped. And it's not a scene that really drags out too long or anything like that. It's a good scene. It's a really memorable scene from the movie. They kind of revisited it in The Towering Inferno, where in this case, there's a scene in that film where Paul Newman, one of the along with Steve McQueen, one of the leads of that film, where Paul Newman is trying to get Jennifer Jones, the old Fox movie starlet, where he's trying to get her and these two kids to safety. And so they have to travel from one floor to another along this dangling, broken stairway that's just hanging down this shaft over this chasm. And so, Newman has to go travel by himself, then grab one of the kids, bring him down with him. And it's kind of basically a variation of that Hackman Winter scene in the Poseidon Adventure. It is the only scene in the Towering Inferno that I think is a little weak, because I think they do drag that on a little bit too much. It's like we watch them go up the ladder and go down the ladder, and we get it. It's dangerous, it's threatening. You could probably tighten that up a bit. Well, in Time Ran Out, it's like, let's just take that to the nth degree. Now we're going to have Burgess Meredith as this former tightrope walker in the carnival, who now has to walk across this broken, dangling wooden bridge over this chasm to get away from the volcano, and he's got to do it with a balance beam and with a child on his back. And now they're just like completely dragging out and ripping off from the earlier films. And it's really that level of like, let's just steal from our previous work that's kind of brought to When Time Ran Out. I mean, the effects are not at the level of the earlier films. I think, it had a pretty decent sized budget if you look at the numbers, but the reality is I think that pretty much went to the cast, not really into the actual, effects work as much. Now, of course, all that being said, I can't wait to get my hands on this set. I enjoyed the film. But it was kind of like the last breath of the theatrical release side of the disaster genre of the 70s. Airport is kind of looked at as the film. The first Airport came out in 1970, and it's kind of debatable whether you want to call that the beginning of the disaster boom of the 70s, or whether you really want to call it the Poseidon Adventure, which came out in 72, because really the Poseidon Adventure is what kicked it off. And when Universal saw the success of the Poseidon Adventure, the Towering Inferno, which Both of those, if I'm not mistaken, were Fox Warner co-productions. They kind of looked into their catalog and said, "Oh yeah, we have this movie from 1970, Airport, and it had an all-star cast, and there was kind of had many different plot elements to it, but one of them was a disaster element of this bomber on board an airplane. So let's just make sequels to that." So, the original Airport's kind of almost like retconned into the disaster genre, and it is its own way, a disaster film. And the demise of the genre really kind of came out in like 79 and 80, where you had these films like Meteor from American International Pictures, which bombed, When Time Ran Out bombed, the Concorde Airport 79 bombed. That was the last of the airport movies, which did so badly that they tried to re-release it and make it seem like it was an intentional comedy. And of course, 1980 is also when Airplane comes out and it starts making fun of all these films and is a huge hit. So that's really, there were a couple more of the TV movies that kind of made their way out in like 83-ish, but that was really the end of it. Now, one of the things that'll be interesting to see about the set, aside from what extras they have on it, is specifically that film When Time Ran Out. What is going to be on this set? We know, that we've seen the DVD releases of the other films, the five TV projects, and Beyond the Pacific Adventure. I'm sure it'll be the pretty much HD upgrades, new scans on all that stuff. But When Time Ran Out has kind of an interesting history. It was originally released at about 2 hours in running length, like a little over 2 hours, and like I said, did not do well upon release. When did he went to release it internationally? They cut it down by like 20 minutes. And then when they went to air it on TV, they actually beefed it up to about 2.5 hours so they could fill out that 3-hour time slot, which is very common with the disaster genre. Not just Irwin Allen stuff, but also Jennings Lang stuff. A lot of the disaster movies have longer cuts just for TV. Earthquake, The Swarm, which is actually the Blu-ray release of The Swarm, is the 2.5-hour cut, the TV cut. Now, when VHS came around, Warner Brothers put out the 2.5-hour cut on VHS, the longest cut, which is what I have on. I have that tape. Unfortunately, the downside to that is that, like pretty much all VHS tapes of that era, it's meant for a square TV, and that film was shot in a 2:35 to 1 aspect ratio. It was shot in scope, which basically means in order to fit the image into that square without letterboxing it, because they really didn't do that at the time that VHS came out, they have to crop off basically half the image. That's really about how much gets lost. And you have these compositions in that film where actors are talking to each other from opposite ends of the screen, and the only way to make that work is you basically have to, choose the half of the screen where the person is talking, who's talking, is located. And then when the other person responds, even though there wasn't initially a cut there when the film came out, you were just seeing one master shot. They do have to make a cut so they can go to the other side of that image. Now, when the DVD era came around, and when Time Ran Out made its way to the DVD era, I was really excited to finally see this film in its original aspect ratio. And unfortunately, what happened was it wasn't the 2.5-hour cut that came to DVD. It wasn't even the 2-hour cut. It was the shortest cut possible, the roughly 100-minute international cut. And some people had inquired with Warner Brothers about why this was. And kind of what happened, apparently, it seems, is that, when they went to cut the film down to that shorter international version, they apparently cut the negative, I think, is what happened. Rather than cutting some kind of intermediary film source that you could then create prints from, they actually went to the original negative and cut it. And so that footage, I don't know that the negative for that 20 minutes of footage even exists anymore. And so you could, of course, restore the film to that length. You could try to find prints, or maybe they do have like an internegative or an interpositive. But Warner Archives pretty much just, because that's who had handled this kind of release, they just pretty much straight up came out and said, it's not worth it. Like, this film will never make the money back to justify us going to that efforts to restore it to even its theatrical release, to say nothing of the 2.5-hour cut. My hopes are not very high that this Blu-ray box set will be anything more than the same cut as on the DVD. And that's not a slap at Shout Factory. I think it's just an acknowledgement of, the financial side of it, that I doubt Shout Factory is going to see it as being worth their while to invest in that kind of restoration, especially if they're putting out as part of a box set. I mean, if they're going to do that, they would put that much money into rebuilding the theatrical cut even. I would think they'd have to get their money back by releasing it by itself. I am hoping at the very least, though, that they can include like a standard def version of the 2.5 hour cut, because presumably the video master of that, the tape master from which the VHS tapes were made, that still exists, and so they could at least put that on there as like a standard def. And they've done that before. They put out the 70s disaster movie 2 Minute Warning, which I'm a huge fan of, about the sniper at the football game. I watch that almost every Super Bowl Sunday. And there was a that only had one theatrical release version. There wasn't like a different international version or anything like that. But there was a longer version for TV that was only available in SD, standard def. And they did include that on the disc, even though it was just standard def. And I watched it. It was cool to finally see that. But yeah, just overall though, just to get all these movies in one set, really, really psyched for that. So, passings in the world of media lately. Of course, the big one's Alan Arkin, the incredible Academy Award-winning actor, passed away age 89. What a range, though! Like, everything from the Arkin played everything from the incredibly terrifying sunglasses wearing, disguise using villain of Wait Until Dark, terrorizing a blind Audrey Hepburn, to, of course, one of my favorite films he's in, Freebie and the Bean, where he and James Caan are in this one of the original buddy cop movies. And just it's a film with so much great action and black comedy in it. But Arkin, been around forever, came on the scene with a couple Oscar nominations in the 60s for Best Actor for The Russians Are Coming, and The Heart is a Lonely Hunter, which again speaks to range. You got a comedy on one hand and this very heavy drama on the other. But it wasn't until much later in his career that he finally took home the award, Best Supporting Actor for Little Miss Sunshine, and then earned another nomination for Argo. But I'm just looking at his filmography. Of course, he was in the original The In-Laws, Edward Scissorhands, Glengarry Glen Ross, The Rocketeer. Kids of the 80s will remember him vocally from the Last Unicorn. He was has that kind of footnote in film history for starring in the film Inspector Clouseau, which was the third of the Pink Panther movies, the one where Peter Sellers and Blake Edwards didn't want to come back, so it was kind of like a one-off where Alan Arkin did the role. He directed a couple films as well, both of which he also starred in, Little Murders and Fire Sale. Something interesting I didn't know is that he'd actually, early, before he really even was into the acting, is that he was a folk singer. He was in a group called the Terriers, and actually his very first film role was in a B-movie musical called Calypso Heatwave, which I'm familiar with that movie. I didn't realize he was in it, and he's in that as a member of the Terriers, and that's actually his first film. And of course, on the small screen too, he had recent success with the Kaminsky Method with Michael Douglas, and had gotten 2 Emmy nominations for that series. He had a total of 6 Emmy nominations over his career, and yeah, so it's just really sad to see him pass away. He had some kind of cardiac issues. Of course, he has several sons who are in the film and television business as well. Adam Arkin, probably the best known of those, who's on Chicago Hope, and Halloween horror fans know him from Halloween H2O. But yeah, sorry to see him pass away at 89. Marcia Dean left us at age 101, which is a very good age to leave. Not a household name, of course. She worked mostly in lower budgeted films, but she does kind of have a keynote role in that she was the leading lady, the scream queen of Hammer Films' The Quatermass Experiment, which is a really good movie. Definitely recommend checking that out. Quatermass, the character of Professor Quatermass was kind of like a proto Doctor Who without being an alien who has multiple lives, but just that kind of like inquisitive, investigative scientist, that kind of aspect of it. And it was a character that was originally featured in these different television serials made over in Britain, and they were one by one adapted into feature films. And the first of those was The Quatermass Experiment. And Marcia Dean, she wasn't British, but she did go over there to film the lead female role in that movie. A lot of her stuff, like I said, tended to be more towards B movies, not necessarily always exploitation. Sometimes stuff like Sins of Jezebel or Moro Witch Doctor. But she was also in a couple of Samuel Fuller's movies, like The Baron of Arizona. Once in a while, showed up in a studio project like Take Care of My Little Girl and The Revolt of Mamie Stover. Both of those were over at Fox. Even produced a couple low budget films, including Terrence Fisher's horror comedy, The Horror of It All. But yeah, passed away age 101. And also, we lost Academy Award nominated producer Lawrence Turman, who got his Best Picture Oscar nod for The Graduate, a little film you may or may not have heard of. But he passed away at age 96. And you just look at, again, this is a guy who just look at his filmography, just some of the stuff he produced. He did John Carpenter's The Thing. He did both short circuit films, American History X, The River Wild, Pretty Poison with Anthony Perkins, the cult classic 60s film. Produced Judy Garland's last movie, I Could Go On Singing, and directed a couple movies as well. One of which I really want to see. It's a Richard Benjamin comedy from the 70s called The Marriage of a Young Stockbroker. And unfortunately, it's a Fox film, so it's tied up at Disney, and I don't think Fox even gave it a DVD release. And the other film he directed was Second Thoughts, which was one of Lucie Arnaz's attempts to be a leading lady on the big screen. But yeah, again, really, really great filmography that he left behind. We also lost, at age 92, Spanish actress Carmen Sevilla, who, again, to people here, might not necessarily be a name that's familiar, but in Spain, she was a big deal. She was a dancer, a singer, one of their highest paid stars over there. Probably one of her best known roles to American audiences, though, would be in Nicholas Ray's King of Kings, in which she played Mary Magdalene. But definitely most of her success was in her native Spain. Fans of horror will know her from No One Heard the Scream, which is a 70s horror film, which Severin put out on Blu-ray not too long ago. And she was the lead in that film. All right, now, time for the movie of the week. And being that this was just the 4th of July, I think it's the perfect time to talk about a film that I watch every year on Independence Day, Day of Independence. And that's the 1972 musical comedy 1776. So 1776 tells the story of the writing of the Declaration of Independence. And initially started out as a play. Came out in 1969. Songs and music by Sherman Edwards, a guy named Sherman Edwards. And the play itself was written by Peter Stone, who by this time was already an Academy Award-winning screenwriter, who had won the Oscar for Father Goose, the Cary Grant movie, but who also wrote one of my favorite films, and that would be Charade, the very classic mixture of suspense and comedy, a lot of times referred to as the greatest Hitchcock movie never made by Hitchcock. And in that same vein, he also wrote such films as Arabesque and Mirage, these films dealing with intrigue and high glamour. He would subsequently write the Taking of Pelham 123, the original version of that. And he wrote the actual play, though, the book to the play. Now, when the play came out in 1969. And there was some concern about how well a play that, even though it wasn't trying to be patriotic or flag waving or anything, but just by very nature of the fact that it was dealing with this kind of time in our country's history, which is often viewed through a lens of patriotism, it was wondered how well is this play going to do with the Vietnam War going on, and the play ended up being a huge hit and won multiple Tonys. Including for its director, Peter H. Hunt, who, side note, Helen Hunt's uncle. And good old Jack Warner, no longer at Warner Brothers Studios, the company he founded with his 3 other Warner brothers. Yeah, Jackie Boy was out on his own, and he decided to buy the rights, with his own money, the film rights to the play. And in doing so, in bringing this to the big screen, brought with him the director, Peter H. Hunt, who had not previously directed any feature films, and a good deal of the cast. Most of the cast in the film had appeared in a stage production of this at one time or another, if not the original Broadway run. Likewise, Peter Stone came on board to write the script for the film, obviously being an old hand at that. So, as the title implies, it's set in the year 1776 in the summer leading up to July 4th. In Philadelphia, the Continental Congress is gathered, representatives from each of the 13 colonies, deciding, they're not even debating whether or not they are going to declare independence from England. They're trying to even get to the point where they can debate it. Basically, there's these two factions. One, which believes that independence is the way to go, and kind of the main leader of that faction is John Adams of Massachusetts, played by William Daniels, years before he would go on to make himself a household name among multiple generations of TV watchers via Knight Rider, St. Elsewhere, and later Boy Meets World. But by now, already a very well-known stage actor. He'd actually gotten a Tony nomination for his performance as John Adams in 1776 and had been in several films. He kind of leads the pro-independence faction. But the problem is that he, as they joke about in the film, is obnoxious and disliked. He's someone who just doesn't know how to really work well with others. He's so passionate and committed to what he believes in and so sure that he's right that he doesn't know how to make the message malleable and palatable for those on the opposing side so that he can convince them to come over. And his two chief allies, unsurprisingly, are Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, inventor of the stove, as he's often referred to in the film. He's played by the great Howard Da Silva, a wonderful character actor. His career goes way back to old Hollywood. A lot of big films throughout the 40s, like The Lost Weekend and The Sea Wolf and Sergeant York. Unfortunately, in the early 50s, he was a victim of the Hollywood blacklist brought about by the communist witch hunts. And basically, there's like a 10-year stretch where he's really not doing anything in the way of TV or film. He just came to the East Coast and was doing theater. But then as the effects of McCarthyism and the communist scare kind of waned away, he was able to reestablish himself. And he like Daniels, had played this role on the original Broadway production. And then Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, also played by someone from the original Broadway opening, and that's Ken Howard. This is Ken Howard pre-White Shadow, but already having starred in a few movies as well. Now, the other side, the side that feels that the what should be done is to kind of reconcile with England. Yes, this is about a year after shots were fired at Lexington and Concord, but this side feels still that peace can be reattained. And heading up that is another representative from Pennsylvania, Benjamin Franklin State. John Dickinson is this person's name. And he's played by Donald Madden. Donald Madden did not play this role on the stage, and this, in fact, would be his only feature film. Did a lot of TV work. And it's interesting, a lot of the actors in this film seem to be based in, like, the New York area. Because if you look at their filmographies, they have a lot of them. They have very few feature film roles. They do a lot of TV, and it's like East Coast TV. It's soaps. A lot of them were in dark shadows. It's theatrical work. So it's a really interesting collection of these performers, many of whom, they're incredibly gifted performances. That they're great. They're so memorable and so unique, but they're not people who you see necessarily in a lot of stuff. It's not like they're even filling out the cast with like the John Carradines or the Strother Martins, or just like the kind of character actors who you see in film all the time. These are character actors who are great at what they do, just like those kind of more venerable Hollywood character actors, but they're not seen in films a lot. They're just not. They're just not doing a lot of feature work, it makes for a very interesting goulash of a cast. Especially when you think that this is a big studio film, right? Jack Warner's producing it. It was released by Columbia Pictures. It's adapting this huge play. It was a big hit. And your three leads are William Daniels, Howard Da Silva, and Ken Howard. None of whom are stars in the sense of star power, but all, of course, recreating those top three, especially recreating their Broadway roles. And it was a great choice. It was great to do it that way. I think that it was a really perfect decision to stick with so many of the original play actors instead of trying to like maybe go for a more traditional lead in this case. But I can't speak enough about just how good this movie is. Um, I mean, Peter Stone, if you've watched Charade, if you've watched The Taking of Pelham 123, he's a great writer. I mean, think about those two movies. They're both kind of rooted in suspense in a way. Obviously, Charade is a much more lighthearted film, and again, it kind of also tacks on that cover of glamour and beauty and glitz with, Audrey Hepburn and Cary Grant looking as good as any human being has a right to, and travel all over Europe and high intrigue. But then you go to something like Taking a Pelham 123, which is a much more visceral, gritty, down in the subway tunnels of New York City with ruthless subway hijackers threatening to kill people. So yeah, they're both kind of suspense films, but they're very much worlds apart within suspense, and they're both incredible movies. And a big part of that is the writing. I mean, very memorable dialogue in those films, but also just really well constructed storylines. And likewise, I mean, 1776 has just such a great use of humor in it within the writing, and not just the writing of Stone's screenplay and play, but also just the songs as well by Sherman Edwards. I mean, the humor in this film, it's such a great and skilled interweaving of comedy and humor within a storyline that has so much built-in drama in it, right? The formation of a country, which is, I mean, think about it. The 13 colonies had already engaged in military action against their motherland, and an army had already been formed with George Washington as the leader. This is a year after those initial shots were fired, and so much hangs on the balance. Are you going to go forward and create this new nation? And if so, then you have to, fight against this much larger, more skilled military force, or are you going to try to, send out the olive branch, make peace, but then hope that those of you who were initially in favor of independence won't be hanged as traitors? So much going on, so much that has dramatic potential, and this film does such a great job of never disregarding that, never minimizing it, never making fun of the drama itself, yet at the same time, just overflowing with such great, memorable humor. It really humanizes these characters, these kind of legendary historical characters. It makes them seem grounded and real, people that we can laugh with and laugh at. It just does such a great job of melding these different vibes of, like I said, of comedy and drama into one unique thing, into one cohesive tone. And just to keep such a story moving with so many pieces, because you remember this is about the Continental Congress, so there's 13 colonies, and some of these colonies have multiple key representatives. Plus, you have the head of the Continental Congress, John Hancock. You have a couple other very important characters. There's the congressional custodian. There's the secretary of the Congress. You have so many different characters that you have to make sure the audience keeps them distinguished from each other, remembers who they are, remembers who their different personalities are, and what they're fighting for. Are they for independence, against it? And pretty much none of them are being played by actors who are really super familiar, right? It's not like you can say, okay, I know who that character is. That's, that's Gregory Peck, or that's Brad Pitt, or that's James Dean, or something like that. It's like they're almost all being played by actors who had, very little, virtually no name or facial recognition to the audience. And yet, when you watch this movie, you always know who everyone is. There's never a moment in this film where you forget, oh, who is this guy? What side of this debate is he on? Why does he feel the way he feels? Is he someone who's firmly entrenched in his beliefs, or is he one of the ones who's kind of like straddling that each side is trying to convince of their own beliefs? You always know exactly who each person is. And that's incredible. And that's a big part of that's a testament to, Stone and Edwards with their script, their play, their songs, and creating these distinct characters. Another big thing that's really testament though to is just the cast themselves, that they're able to bring alive, completely disappear into and bring alive these characters in a way that distinguishes them from each other without ever seeming forced. It's not like one of the actors is like, oh man, are they going to remember that I'm playing the representative from New Hampshire instead of New Jersey? You know what I'll do? I'll stick like a big boa feather around my neck or something. You know what I mean? Like they're never doing anything outrageous or ostentatious to remind you, oh, I'm this guy. You're probably going to forget who I am because you don't know who I am as an actor and you don't know who this person is from history. So I'm going to do something really showy and loud to remind you of who I am. No, they just completely dedicated to bringing alive with very nuanced, effective performances these very well delineated characters, very well drawn by Peter Stone, the screenwriter and playwright, and Sherman Edwards, the songwriter. But kudos to Peter Hunt, first film he ever directed. In fact, the play was the first play he ever directed. And you watch this movie, and yes, I think a lot of people would say this could have been more cinematic. Now, they definitely did open it up for it being a film. There are times where they go outdoor and they're able to do slightly wider shots of Philadelphia. And there's these scenes where John Adams is interacting with his wife, even though she's back at home. Basically, what they did is they had the actor, William Daniels as John Adams, and the actress Virginia Vestoff, who played his wife Abigail. Even though they're in different, she's back in Massachusetts while he's in Philadelphia, they'll speak to each other through their letters, and so they'll be on screen at the same time, even though they're in different locations talking to each other, and that will kind of give a chance to kind of show her back in Massachusetts. So there are times where they do definitely expand the play beyond a theatrical bounds. But I could definitely see people watching this and saying, there really were a lot more opportunities to be even more cinematic. And I think that there is maybe some truth to that. There are some, I think if this was maybe Hunt's third film or fourth film, that maybe it would feel a little bit more film-like rather than stage-like. But that's not saying, I'm saying it would feel more film-like. That's not to say that it doesn't feel film-like as it is. I think he does a phenomenal job, all the more so as a first-time director, in staging this film in such a way, again, so that there's no confusion. This is a film ripe for confusion. I mean, it's just, I can't emphasize it enough. You go into this story, yeah, you're going to know who Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson are, and John Adams, and maybe John Hancock, but you're not going to know who all these other people are. The Rutledge of the Carolinas and Lyman Hall. You're not going to know who these people are. Probably the average person from their history classes back in high school or whatever. And you're going into the story, and you have all these characters who are constantly interacting with each other in this one location. And like I said, yeah, they're played by non-recognizable people. And again, to Hunt's credit, his directing, his placement of the camera at any given point is just so effective in making it never seem static. This film never, even though it's the good chunk of it takes place in this one location inside the meeting place of the Congress, Independence Hall. It never feels theatrical or stage bound or set bound because, and part of that is because of the choices they make to open it up a little, to go outside at times, and even if it's just out to the front of the building or the side. But it's also because Hunt constantly knows where to move the camera. He knows when to have a close-up versus a medium shot. He knows when he should be on Adams versus Dickinson, when to be on the guy who's talking versus the guy who's reacting. His placement of his directing of this is so good at just being good. I mean, like, he just goes so far beyond the very minimum of what you would need to keep this from feeling set bound, to keep this from feeling like just a filmed play. Because I've seen that in movies. Like, random example, Laurence Olivier, the famous movie he did with Marilyn Monroe, The Prince and the Showgirl, which was based on a play, and the making of that movie was the inspiration for the film My Week with Marilyn with Michelle Williams and Kenneth Branagh. And that's a movie that just, it feels like basically like they filmed the play, almost like or even a movie that's not based on a play, like All About Eve, Joseph Mankiewicz's famous film. That's a very static film, and it's very dialogue driven. In 1776, again, without ever seeming ostentatious, without ever seeing, without ever having the camera zooming all over the place or soaring through. Sometimes there can be that temptation when you're adapting a play for the big screen to really, let's do everything we can do possible to make sure people don't think it was a play. Let's really, nowadays, I think if they filmed this, they'd start out with probably a drone shot flying through Philadelphia and underneath horses' hooves and up in the air, and it'd be too much. And they did just such a great job of hitting that right balance of opening it up, of editing and placing the camera and making those cutting decisions in such a way that it just constantly feels moving. It constantly feels fresh. The film constantly feels energetic, and that there's really no confusion about what's going on or who believes what or who these characters are. I mean, just to pull that off, especially for a 3-hour film, especially when you're a first-time director, and a lot of these cast members are more TV-based and stage-based. It's just an incredible feat, and just a testament to the craft involved. It's a great film. I love this film. And William Daniels, I mean, the film did get one Oscar nomination for cinematography for Harry Stradling Jr., whose father was a famous cinematographer, Harry Stradling Sr., of course, multiple Oscar winner, shot like My Fair Lady and Guys and Dolls. And Jr., he also shot a lot of big movies. He did The Way We Were and Little Big Man. And definitely has some really great, especially some really great low light cinematography in this film. There's a song sung by a young courier in the colonial army, mostly sung by him, and it's almost done entirely to candlelight with inside Independence Hall, and just really, really well shot. But William Daniels totally should have gotten nominated for an Oscar. I mean, all the actors are good in this movie. There isn't a bad performance of the bunch. And especially shout out to Donald Madden playing John Dickinson of the anti-independence side. Again, whose only feature film this was, and who sadly died at the age of 49. That's another thing. You go through a lot of the cast in this film. William Daniels is still with us, of course. But a lot of the actresses who've passed on died very young. Many of them did not make it till 70 or even 65. But Donald Madden, who plays Dickinson, it's a delicious performance. His elocution is amazing. His diction is just incredible. But Daniels, I mean, that is an Oscar-worthy performance as John Adams. It is such a defining performance. And of course, like I said, other people know him from anything elsewhere. Or he's Kit the car, or he's the teacher or principal, whatever. I never watched Boy Meets World. It's the subsequent generation. My sister's a fan of it. But, he's from that generation. He's known from those TV shows. But to me, this is who William Daniels is. And I've seen, like I said, I've seen him in other movies too, and guest shots on TV. Again, totally, completely, at the very least, nominated for an Oscar. And he could have been nominated in either category. Give him Best Supporting or Lead. It's an ensemble cast. We've talked about the politics of the Oscars before too, but I mean, it's just such his passion, his communication of the passion of John Adams, his impatience with the way things are going, his frustration, his humor. It's just a fully embodied character. Just an unbelievable performance. And I was curious. I was like, who was he going up against that year? So this film came out in 1972, so that was the 1973 awards. So again, this is a performance. William Daniels, he could have been nominated Best Actor or Supporting Actor. It's kind of like that kind of a. He's the lead in many ways, but because of the ensemble nature of the piece, he could have gone either way. Best Actor nominations were given to both Michael Caine and Laurence Olivier for Sleuth, Paul Winfield for Sounder, Peter O'Toole for The Ruling Class, and the winner was Marlon Brando for The Godfather. Now, of course, even if Daniels had been nominated in that category, Brando was going to win no matter what. In supporting category, The Godfather had 3 nominations in supporting actor: Al Pacino, James Caan, and Robert Duvall. Also, Eddie Albert for The Heartbreak Kid, and then the award actually went to Joel Grey for Cabaret. So, a lot of it was a pretty impressive year for films. Godfather, Sounder, Cabaret was that year. Poseidon Adventure. My Girl Shelley Winters got nominated that year. John Huston's Fat City came out that year. Um, Boy, he should have been nominated. Give him make a sixth nomination, whatever. My guy, he's so good in this film. Um, it's interesting because John Jakes, the author, wrote North and South. He also wrote a series of books, which anybody who goes to garage sales is probably familiar with because you always see them there. The Kent Chronicles, and it's this never-ending series of books that traces this one family throughout American history. And they adapted the first three books into these like 3-hour TV movies in the late 70s. The Bastard, The Rebels, The Seekers. And they kind of cover, the first two cover the American Revolution, and then The Seekers, the third one, is kind of time right after that. And definitely those are ones I recommend for 4th of July viewing as well, if you can get a hold of them. The DVDs are out of print. But the interesting thing is William Daniels is in the first two. I think it's the first one, The Bastard. He plays John Adams, and this is after 1776, of course, because I think it came out like 78, that TV movie. And then in the second one, The Rebels, he plays Sam Adams, John Adams' cousin. But yeah, that's just interesting to see. Also, a big shout out to for this cast to David Ford, who plays John Hancock, who congressional president, known for his wicked, bad, large signature, as well as to Ralston Hill, whose only film this was. He plays the Secretary of Congress, Mr. Thompson, who's always calling for the votes and as well as reading the various memos and dispatches that the Congress receives from the never-seen George Washington. I'm just thinking about the movie now. I'm just cracking up at some of the lines, the great lines of dialogue. It's the humor in it is so funny. Interesting release history when it came out. Jack Warner was tight with old Tricky Dick there, Richard Nixon, and there was a song in the movie called "Cool Considerate Men," sang by Dickinson and the other anti-independence figures, and it was a song about kind of the viewpoints of conservative men of property and wealth. And Nixon, being a Republican, wasn't too keen on that and urged Jack Warner to cut that from the released film, which Warner did. And he told the editor to destroy it, the footage, but she ended up saving it. And so now you can actually see that footage restored back into it. This film's been released by Sony on DVD, Blu-ray, and now 4K. And the 4K release, it looks incredible. Has that, what's really kind of the cut to go with. It's called the director's cut, and that reinstates that musical number that had been cut out, Cool Considerate Man. It reinstates the original opening credits that had also been removed. Originally, they had this really cool mural showing, Revolutionary era Philadelphia as the credits played over the opening. But it was only like shown one time with that opening, and subsequently, whenever they showed the movie, it just opened up with the opening scene, and just the word 1776 appears over it, I guess, and you don't even see the opening credits. The 4K release, though, from Sony has like 4 cuts of the movie. It has the original theatrical release that was shortened. It has the director's cut with that number put in I told you about. It has an extended cut, which is slightly longer than the director's cut. It's more about timing and pacing. I didn't care for that cut as much. I watched that once. And it also has this 180-minute cut, which is like on the Laserdisc, where like everything's in it. And I'm interested to check that out. I haven't watched that yet. But yeah, I watched this. It's just a 3-hour movie, and it never. That's the other thing too. Sometimes people will be like, how do you feel about watching long movies? Well, to me, the length of a movie really doesn't matter. Size doesn't matter. It's really about the quality of it. There are movies that are like 75 minutes long that could be a chore to get through, but this is definitely a 3-hour movie that never drags. Now I say that. In saying that, of course, y'all know how I feel about movies from this era. If you're not a fan of this era, you probably just the editing, the different way that they made films back then might grind against your native sensibilities. But to me, it never is a chore to sit through this. My girlfriend and I watch it, like I said, every year around this time, and it never gets old. I'm a big fan of this too because I had an interest in kind of American Revolutionary era history when I was younger. that kind of not so much like the very early settlements of America with like the Pilgrims and stuff, but once you get into like the early 1700s and things like the French and Indian War era, the kind of the era chronicled in James Fenimore Cooper's novels going into the American Revolution. I always found that era really interesting, and I liked things like the Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which was set around that time, and of course we all know how I feel about the 70s. I love the 70s. A big fan of that era, and of course in the 70s you had the bicentennial, the 200th anniversary. So it's like this era is like the perfect melding of two things I love. It's the 1970s and everything I love about that with colonial history. And even though this movie came out 4 years before the bicentennial, it's basically good enough. It's like it came out in the bicentennial. So it's like the perfect cinematic amalgamation of my interest in Revolutionary War history and my love for the bicentennial in the 70s. I couldn't ask for more. I kind of wonder why they didn't just wait. It seems like so obvious to me that you would wait until 1976 to have the movie come out. But hey, who am I to say? Maybe they just didn't. Maybe they didn't think waiting longer would there'd be less interest in the play. It's interesting in that you think now you have a play like Hamilton, which is about kind of the similar era in history, and they did like a TV version of it on like Disney Plus or something, but it was basically just a film play. An actual film, narrative film adaptation of Hamilton still hasn't happened yet, and that's been out for a while. And that's partially done to ensure that the actual theatrical run is successful. So yeah, I don't know, just thinking out loud, I just think it's interesting that they didn't just wait till 1976. But hey, whatever. Maybe they wouldn't have had the same cast in it, and I would have been upset. Film didn't really do that great though, I don't believe, financially when it came out. Like the initial like screenings did good, but then it just overall the whole domestic total was not too strong. Which I guess I could see a film like this at that era. I mean, you think about this coming out the same year as The Godfather. This is around the same time as The French Connection and Dirty Harry. I mean, it is kind of a film that I could see audiences at that time maybe not responding to, maybe responding more to in the theatrical community or playing on Broadway with New York City community. I could see them being more favorable to it than the wider film-going audience. Like I said, it got the Oscar nomination for cinematography, got a Golden Globe nomination. But yeah, I think it probably, with time, its reputation has increased. I mean, it was never looked at as a bad film, by any means. But it's just, I think the love for it has just kind of grown with time. Did end up being Jack Warner's last movie, the last film he produced. Then he passed away a few years later. But yeah, 1776. Absolutely recommend this film for your 4th of July viewing, along with Jaws and anything else you feel inclined to, Johnny Tremaine, or any other such staples. But yeah, I definitely get this before next July 4th. So thank you very much. Thank you. That'll do it. That'll do it for this week's episode of Carpet City Cinema, our 4th of July episode. Please continue to share the love about Gila Films, about Carpet City Cinema, about Break Glass Movie. Follow us on our various social media profiles. Click the links, share the posts, all that good stuff. And thank you very much for tuning in. And we'll see you next week.